Okay.
I am flawed, I am defective, I am damaged, I am broken.
Yeah.
I needed to get away from the domestic violence and everything that was there in my home. Toxic relationships are not an issue. They can be fixed, they can be healed, people can find love. Most people are getting their information from social media, which is a bite-sized information, which is also a lot of times polarized information. They saw so much of themselves when they read the book. I'm not writing because I am writing for someone's reaction. I'm writing because I have something to say. When she would cry as a child, her mother would just leave the room. It is something you pick up even before you've developed language. We now have a lot of labels for a lot of things.
Important chapter asking, are you the toxic one in the relationship?
Because nobody wants a bad relationship. Everybody wants to eventually find love. If you're not crying in your pillow, is it even love?
Why is mental abuse not even validated?
Honestly, most emotionally abusive relationships will first break your spirit. The day you start compromising on your anchors because you want to keep the peace or you want to let something go by, you're betraying yourself.
The next show by Nagma. Hello everyone, welcome back to yet another episode of The Next Show, where we explore the stories behind the books and the people who write them. Today's conversation is one that I believe is deeply important, not just because of the book we are discussing, but because of what it asks us to confront about ourselves. When we talk about toxic relationships, we often focus on relationship itself. But what if the story began way much earlier? What if our understanding of love, self-worth, the boundaries that were shaped long before we ever even fell in love? Joining me today is Prachi Saxena, a trauma-focused relationship therapist, dating and premarital coach, and the author of When You Give Everything All at Once, the Indian Woman's Guide to Navigating Toxic Relationship. Yeah, I know, it's very important. So blending her own deeply personal journey with years of therapeutic experience, Prachi's book goes beyond identifying red flags. It explores why we ignore them, why leaving is often far more complicated than just how it appears, and what actually is the root of all of it. We're going to talk about childhood, love, trauma, emotional abuse, boundaries, and healing, not just from the perspective of a therapist, but from someone who has lived through all of it herself. So if you've ever questioned your relationships, struggled with people pleasing, or wondered why sometimes mistake pain for love, I hope this conversation offers you clarity, comfort, and perhaps a new way of looking at yourself. Prachi, thank you so much for being part of this conversation today. And how's everything going for you?
Oh, it's going very well, and I'm so happy to be here. We've been in touch for so long through social media, and it just, how the universe conspired to
So true.
bring us together. That was amazing. So I'm just looking forward to this conversation today.
So how has the book journey been for you now, since it's not been very long since the book has been out as well? What's the response? How are people taking it? Because the topic is also not an easy topic, to be very honest.
Agreed.
How's the response from people?
Response has been amazing. Lot of people have actually reached out personally to say they saw so much of themselves when they read the book. And I think that was the biggest reward that I could have. Just the other day, I got a message from someone, who said that I read it, and because I'm also recovering from a divorce and everything, and looking at the book and reading the ending of it, and she's met me recently in a social setting, and she said that I can see myself, my life, going towards a next chapter. And when she said that, I said, well, my job is done. That is exactly why I wrote the story, because I thought that people needed to hear it. People needed to understand that this is not a trap that will keep you trapped forever. You always have a way out. So the
Did you have any backlashes from the society after writing something like that?
No, actually, not really. There was no backlash. In fact, I went through my own multiple processes while writing the book
Yeah.
on this, that I would
Yeah.
write a chapter and then I would like sleep on it for 5 days. And I'd be like, should I be saying this? Should I not be saying this?
Yes.
And that really kept me in a writer's block.
Okay.
And then I reached a point where I said, okay, you know what? The story I have to tell it the way it is. I'm not writing because I am writing for someone's reaction. I'm writing because I have something to say.
Yeah.
And I was very anxious, very scared.
Oh my God, I
honestly,
can't imagine.
you know, the day the final manuscript
Yeah.
went for submission, I was
Yeah.
like, oh my God, now I cannot change anything.
Oh God.
What is going to happen?
Yeah.
But luckily, there's been no backlash. And in fact, everybody who's come in had said that, you know, we did not think about thinking that, you know, you just think bad relationships and you think that exit is the only way out, right?
Yeah.
But everybody said that it just gave us a new perspective. So yeah.
That's actually very interesting. Plus, it's also like when I personally was reading your book. See, one way when you're reading it for work, like podcast, I was reading it to prepare for the podcast also.
Right.
Sometimes you get extremely objective. Like otherwise, any other book which I have nothing to do related to my work, it's a little bit more of you're just reading it for fun also. You get extremely objective. Every single page when I was reading your book, I'm like, God, how did she write this? Oh my God, what was she thinking? Or did this backfire in some way? Or did somebody question when you're writing something like? But then at the same time, you were telling when people are telling that they could resonate or they could find themselves in the shoes. In a lot of spaces, definitely yes. Because I also felt the book was not just talking about relationship, but a lot of things. Your corporate, your friends. It's a lot of things in common. So congratulations to you for building something so amazing and the courage that you have to do that. It's like
thank you so much. And this is just, I think that happened because it was not just my story. So many of my clients, my work as a therapist over 20 years, it just like all came together because this was every woman's story. Every woman who sat in front of me, it was her story. So it is very obvious, I think, that every woman would find a piece of herself somewhere or the other in the book.
Definitely.
So,
definitely. There's not even a question on that at all. Now again, coming to the book and the experiences, or talking about all of us in general, one thing, a root to all of this is love, expectations, and everything that we have in our day-to-day life, right? And we, from the time when we were kids, the first thing that we are seeing or trying to understand love or the perceptions that we have is mostly from our parents. How we see our parents or how our parents are with each other. How much actually does, from a child's mind, seeing their parents create the perceptions of actually love in their mind?
A lot, but actually it's much deeper than that. Because yes, one part of it is that your first template of a partner relationship or a spousal relationship is coming from what you are seeing between your parents. But what it is also doing is that how you are experiencing receiving love from your parents, how love is shown to you and how you are living it is the primary template that gets formed. So it's less about what you are seeing between them. It's more about what is being offered to you and what is getting encoded into your nervous system. So when, so let's say just yesterday we were discussing a case where, you know, this girl was talking about it, that when she would cry as a child, her mother would just leave the room. Right? There was been no response. It's not even like disapproval or something. She would just leave the room. And this girl today has grown up to be somebody who has no template for emotions or reciprocity or responsiveness. Right? So this is the key actually. Like when we say parents, it's less about what you are seeing modeled, more about what you are absorbing as a result of their relationship. So if they have a conflictual, you know, a lot of conflicted relationship, then they, whatever their rage or anger or frustration and everything is also coming on to you as a child in some way or the other. So that is getting encoded into your nervous system. You are learning that, okay, this is not how women should behave, because if women behave like this, the men turn away from them. Or men are generally like this, and therefore, so if you're a girl, you will absorb that, okay, I don't have to be this way because otherwise my man will turn away, or I have to be exactly opposite of what my mom is, because if I want to have a good so all of this, it just becomes a very, very deeply encoded blueprint in your mind.
Like technicality wise, from what age does, like for a child, these actually starts forming? It's like even without our own conscious, way before
Yes.
when we are a baby, or
Absolutely, from infancy. In fact, I've spoken about schemas in my book at one place, right? Like these patterns that you unconsciously keep enforcing.
Yeah.
We even have something known as a pre-verbal schema, which means that it is something you pick up even before you've developed language.
Okay.
So things like abandonment, a fear of abandonment, is something that you will pick up even before you've developed language. For, let's say, if you're an infant and the caregivers are erratic in their response to you, not because they want to be, but because maybe they're caught up in their own drama so much that when you're crying or reaching out, sometimes somebody will come, sometimes somebody will not come. So you learn that if I cry out, I'm not sure if somebody will come. When somebody comes, I feel good, right? But then when they don't come, then I don't know. I have no idea of knowing whether they will come or not come to respond to me. That develops as an adult into this hypervigilance into a relationship. That every time there is closeness, there is also paired anxiety.
Oh my God.
So you have pre-verbal schemas also. So to answer your question, it can begin as early as infancy, even when you don't have language or when you don't even know that you're absorbing things.
I was not meaning to ask this question, but it's still like I want to ask now. So the experience that you are actually getting during your childhood, there are different ways that it can manifest into your adults, right? Like everybody who's gone through a similar abusive family, they're not turning out to be the similar type of adults. There are people who, like, I've experienced this. I ever in my life do not want anybody to experience it, and they turn out to be the biggest green flags in our life, right? And then at the same time, there's the extreme pole opposites as well. But why that difference? Where are these particular kids when they grow up? What is that diversion that is the trigger point putting them into a red or a green?
That's actually an excellent question. Psychologically speaking, one part of it is resilience. Resilience as a characteristic that you will have. Resilience can be a factor of your personality patterns, the environment you are in. So anything can be a protective factor, right? For example, somebody who's in a very chaotic household, but if let's say they have one aunt who is loving, caring, nurturing, that itself becomes a cushion, right? One child will just need one secure attachment in their life to be able to thrive. Then the temperament that you are born with. So all of these factors contribute towards resilience, and resilience, the more you have it within you, will create the distinction of which way you are going. And another factor is shame. Shame, if let's say you internalize shame at some point in your life, shame about, so shame is basically about how I see myself. I am flawed, I am defective, I am damaged, I am broken, or this is something I have to hide, I cannot tell anyone about this. I have a family which is very different from my friend's family. I can't bring anyone home, So any kind of shame when it comes in, that actually leads to more dysfunctional patterns than anything else. So if someone has been able to grow up by being very objective about, okay, these are the difficulties of my life, these are the challenges, but it's okay, like it doesn't have anything to do with me and my future, and I can keep moving forward, they will be more likely to be green flags, as you say. So resilience and shame, these are the two differentiating factors.
Crazy. Okay, you can feel free to stop me if I'm getting, the questions are getting too personal. The moment when you're answering this, I couldn't stop thinking about your intro chapter.
The preface.
Literally, my question to you is, when did you decide that you want to become a therapist? Because your upbringing was not easy.
Yeah.
But then technically what I was telling you about red flags and green flags, you're not just turning into a green flag, you're also trying to make sure others are benefiting from you,
Yeah.
right? What was that inspiration? Why? How come?
Honestly, I think this work found me rather
Okay.
than me finding the profession.
Okay.
To be very honest, psychology was my way out of my house.
Mm.
I
Okay.
needed to get away from
Yeah.
the domestic violence and everything that was there in my home, and I picked up a boarding school which was offering psychology in 11th grade, which had to take me away from home. And I just told my parents that this is what I want to study, and nobody's offering it in my city, so I have to go away. That was an excuse. And I left, and that was 1997. And I'm still studying it. I still think that I'm studying it every day, and there has not been a single day where I felt like I should have done something else. It just kept pulling me in and in and in. And I think now, like, if I examine my own construction as a person, looking back on whatever life I led as a child, it did give me some abilities which allowed me to be a good therapist, I think. Like
Empathy.
Empathy, also just this something that I think as a child I had as like a hypervigilance thing, but now it has sharpened and polished into this ability to attune to another person's nervous system.
Okay.
Right, so earlier it was more anxiety driven. Now, because of my training and studying and like just the experience of 20 years, it has polished into something that allows me to really settle myself into another person's nervous system when they are talking. So now it's just a part of who I am, like a huge part of my identity.
That's crazy. And congratulations, you built an amazing career and
Thank you.
1,000+ clients. That's
Yeah.
like crazy, great. But then again, with having spoken to so many people, so many clients, is there any repetitive pattern in how women in India generally perceive relationships, perceive boundaries, perceive, I don't know, their sense of love? Is there any repetitive patterns that you see should be flagged?
Yeah, there are repetitive patterns, and I think they are shifting in phases.
Okay.
So
Means?
there was a time before, let's say, before therapy speak became common, in language, and
Still a taboo in a lot of places.
just not the taboo. I'm actually talking about the opposite thing.
Okay.
Like now, because of all the content around you,
Yeah.
therapy speak is a very commonly spoken language, whether you understand the thought behind it or you don't.
Yes.
Right?
Overuse.
Right. So now the shift has happened that the perception of relationships has become extremely guarded, extremely protected, extremely rigid in a lot of ways, because like women are building lives for themselves and all of that. And now the idea has become that, okay, the relationship should happen on my terms. Right? It has to happen on my terms, which is now swinging the other way. Now, before this phase, what was happening was that, okay, adjust, compromise, do this, do that. So then it was more like women were mostly raised to be somebody who will become a partner to someone.
Yeah, true.
Right? Rather than, and actually this happens with men also on the other side. Men are raised to be somebody who will bring someone into their family and assimilate that person, usually.
True.
Whereas women are raised to be the person who will go into someone else's family. So you have to design your entire life around who you're going to be once you move into that family. But that is now shifting on to the other extreme. So both patterns, any patterns in extreme, are not healthy. So now here what is happening is that now I have a lot of clients who are in, let's say, late 30s, 40s, single, amazing thriving careers, amazing professional lives, they're amazing women also, but just struggling so much in personal relationships and just like this intimacy bit, not knowing how to give of themselves, because otherwise you can't have a relationship, but also not be so fragile that like if there is a heartbreak then it shatters you.
Finding the sweet spot.
Yeah.
Oh my god, that's actually very true. Does our culture in general have anything to do with all of this shift? Not the upbringing, because when you're talking about how we were raised, like even today in India, if you're going to remote villages, these kind of cultures still exist.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
they are still coming beyond it. But then even the shift that we are talking about, how much is culture really like impacting it?
Definitely, like I don't think we can exist without our cultural influences, right? We are, every human being is a product of the culture they are born in and raised in, right? When it comes to culture, it is so, like for example, we are a collective culture, right? We are not an individualistic society, we are a collective society. But because of globalization and exposure, we are trying to be individualistic in nature, right? But honestly speaking, the roots of that cultural collective consciousness is still very much within us. So it creates this push and pull constantly of, wanting to be my own person, and yet wanting to have my people, my circle, all of
Around me.
That is why there's so much of rise of communities now. What are we doing with communities? We are going back to being a collective culture because that's where our heart lies.
True.
Yeah. Now, when you talk about relationship based influences, of course, every culture will have its own particular influence on relationships. Individualistic cultures will have a different impact on relationships, and collective ones will have a different one. So you cannot take culture out of somebody. Like, and when we say culture, I basically mean the societal environment that forms the fabric of the civilization or the place that you belong to.
Okay. Oh my God, you just made a lot of sense to my life. I mean, multiple ways. I'm not even just talking about relationship. I'm also talking about, because I've been a marketer for what, 10 years now. It even connected me to the things, what we do, how we do, how we promote, what we do in terms of the planning and activities. Oh God, oh my God. Okay, makes sense. I need to reread few chapters. So, how is India and in general global world, is it in the same pattern, or India has a difference? Or are we in any way unique? Like, is there a difference? Or I mean, world as in you can't obviously go and compare every country. Or if I just have to say a US culture and in India, are there similarities in what we are talking about right now?
Okay. I think I have a little bit of a unpopular opinion on this. We are definitely unique as a culture, not because of what is happening today, but because of where we come from. Okay.
Okay, makes sense.
Our original roots are older than any other civilization, right? And we that part of the culture is either most of it is misinterpreted today or lost in translation. So we've really twisted a lot of things. So today we are hardly connected to who we were as a civilization originally.
Yeah, we are not at all.
Right? We are not connected. And that itself is also leading to this sense of isolation, not knowing where you belong and all of that, because we have very rapidly adopted and taken on things which looked very appealing. I'm not saying which culture, like different cultures, not just like the US, but like all the other cultures, right? We've very rapidly taken that on. And while it's good to grow and like expand, if you do that at the cost of your roots, then it's like a kite, right? Like if you break away from what is holding you down, like not back, but like what is keeping you tethered, anchored, then you can fly really high, but then you will just like flounder, right? Like you would not know where you are going. It gives you direction. So India that way has always been unique because some of the things that we have spoken about relationships, if you look at older scriptures, are extremly wise. They have given a lot of templates for very how do you say, like very rooted relationships,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
But somewhere along the way, and I don't deny that, somewhere along the way, that has all gotten very twisted to towards oppression,
Yeah.
towards
Yeah.
um, like people using it to like just with their ulterior motives, and just twisting and turning it to for power dynamics and
Yeah.
all of those things,
True.
which is obviously also another truth that has
Mm.
happened,
Very
right?
true. Very true.
So yeah,
Because
that's it.
I can't stop thinking about, because when you're telling we're going back to our scriptures, when you're
Mm.
going back to our roots,
Mm.
we are still a nation which says Radha Krishna.
Mhm.
That's what we do. That's importance that we are giving to women. But at the same time, our scriptures also talks about the sati,
Mhm.
the practices that we had, or even if we take up any very female, what do I call? I cannot literally say a character from in that perspective. But look at Gandhari, look at Draupadi. So
Mm.
all of these, like even from a sati perspective, if I'm talking about Sita,
Mm.
so all of these are, again, now I'm confused whether I need to take the right example or the wrong example, because
Yeah.
did these examples from our own roots create perceptions of suffering, or did it celebrate suffering to be a great thing in the present? Maybe not today, but
Mm.
in the recent present. Like, how exactly is that also affecting in a bad way?
So I'm glad you're putting this out there, because this really needs to be analyzed a lot more.
Yeah.
And honestly, I'm not an expert on Indian history, so
Yeah.
to say.
Yeah.
But I will say this, that as a therapist, I'm always looking at, or as a psychologist, and with that scientific framework, I'm always looking at everything in context. Right?
Even I'm like, should I ask this question?
No, absolutely.
Somebody
has to ask it, and we have to talk about these things, right?
Exactly.
Because you are not wrong. There is a lot of interpretation
Yeah.
of a lot of
Yeah.
things that has happened.
Yeah.
And I am honestly nobody to say what was right, what was wrong.
Exactly.
Just because I was not there.
Mm.
Today, standing in the advent of civilization where I'm standing, or with the privilege that I'm standing, right? Whatever I have experienced as a woman today in this age,
True.
I honestly do not have the right to analyze or even judge what was happening over there, or to even comment on that, right? But I do know this, that nothing is nothing happens in isolation.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
There is a context to everything. Now that said, is it that everything is like explainable, or we kind of say that okay, no, because there is context, everything is justified? No.
True. Yeah.
There is something I say in therapy a lot of times, especially when talking about unhealthy behaviors, that if you just because you can explain something, that doesn't mean you have to excuse it.
Okay.
Right? You explain something, or you understand something, so that you can make better informed decisions.
Okay.
Yeah, like in the chapter in my book where I'm talking about whether you stay or you leave, you try and understand whatever happened with you or with your partner, not because you can then say कि अच्छा चलो ठीक है, now because I understand why they did it, let me just like go along with
Figure
it,
it
or forgive
out.
it, or something like that. No, not necessarily.
You
You understand it so that you can set yourself free from what is holding you back from making the right decision for yourself, right? So when you, like, going back to what you were saying, a lot of these examples are twisted for convenience also, like convenient interpretations. But at the same time, if you really read original scriptures without bias, like you kind of open your mind and try and read it, there is a lot over there in terms of respect also for women.
a lot.
A lot
That's
over
why
there.
I started about
Right.
telling we are we are a country that talks or uses Radha Krishna and not just
Yeah,
Krishna
and
as
that's
a
like
name.
a very small example. Like we are pioneers of so many,
So many.
unconventional concepts, or like even everything.
Yeah.
So everything is there. Like there is the good and then there is the bad, and also let's understand this, that whenever there is something available to people, who's using it and with what intent
Yeah,
will
true.
also determine what happens, right?
True.
So yeah, like I said, I'm not an expert on commenting that, but
Yeah.
I'm definitely an expert on context.
Yeah,
So
I
I'm always
completely
like,
agree
look
to
at the
that.
context.
So in general, when we're talking about relationships and toxicity in relationships,
Mm.
do you think in the recent years,
Mm.
or is it that we are talking about it more and we're just identifying it better than before?
I don't think they're increasing.
Mhm.
I think they were always around.
Okay.
The same attachment patterns that lead to
Yeah.
toxicity, the same wounding that
Yeah.
leads to toxicity was
Yeah.
always around, because human emotions have not changed.
Yeah. The basics.
Basic
Yeah.
human emotions are still the same. We
Yeah.
experience emotions the same
Yeah.
way. The expression has changed, or again, the context has changed, all of that. What has started to now happen, I think, is that we now have a lot of labels for a lot of things.
Oh, yeah. True.
Yeah.
And we love labels.
We love labels,
Yeah.
right? The human brain is actually designed to divide things into categories as quickly as possible. That's a survival strategy.
Yeah.
But it's hurting us now. Because now, again, going back to the advent of a lot of language available now, therapy speak, psychology language,
Yeah.
you have so much you read
Yeah.
and you come across a lot of information. And honestly, most people are getting their information from social media, which is a bite-sized information, which is also a lot of times polarized information.
Okay.
It is actually most of the time designed to generate an emotional response out of you, not a rational response out of you.
Okay. Makes
Right.
sense.
So you have a lot of terms for a lot of things now. So now what I would change about your question is, it's not that toxic relationships have become more common.
Yeah.
It is that toxic relationships are being labeled abusive more often. And there is a huge difference.
Okay.
Just the other day, day before yesterday, I was reading a post which said that if you are somebody who needs to walk away from a room after
Yeah.
an argument from your partner, that is not just taking space, that is emotional abuse.
Okay. That's a little extreme.
Right. You know, and
Yeah.
anybody who's actually with a partner who does this
Yeah.
will immediately identify with it
Yeah.
and will feel actually very validated. Right? Will feel like, oh yeah, okay, so what is happening with me is abuse. No, but what about a pattern? The person is
Yeah.
avoidant, maybe, and they need more space to regulate
Yeah.
themselves,
Yeah.
and they probably don't know how to come back to the conversation.
Yeah.
And that's something that can be fixed,
Yeah.
right? But if you continue to shame the person
Yeah.
for what they are, apparently they have no control over, but they do, then it's not going to get you anywhere. So this is the barrier that is the bigger problem now. Toxic relationships are not an issue. They can be fixed, they can be healed, people can find love, people can heal together. But if you call something abusive, and abuse has no repair, there has to be exit. But you have to understand what is abuse.
True.
So that is the issue now.
Wow. So, coming back to this, now your answers are taking me to 100 places. But then again, majority of the time, even like when you're telling in social media and everywhere, 99.9% the conversation is around, is your partner toxic? But your book also talks about a very important chapter asking, are you the toxic one in the relationship? Which I don't think I've really seen any content in social media so far. I mean, there might be, maybe my algorithm is not giving me that anyhow.
Yeah.
How often do people actually think, like from the people you meet, like from the, let's say 1,000 as a sample size, how many would actually be even open to considering that, no, I'm the toxic one? Like in general.
Honestly, like I've been very fortunate, I would say, in this aspect, where all of my clients,
Yeah.
when it comes to relationship issues, they have arrived at a place, unless it was abuse that we were
Yeah.
dealing with. Of course, that's a completely different topic of conversation.
Mm.
But if we were looking at any kind of unhealthy patterns in relationships,
Yeah.
they have eventually arrived at a point where they've both taken ownership of their contribution to this dynamic.
Mm.
It takes work, of course. When you were asking me this, I was just reminded of this client that I have. She's on this matrimonial journey where she's looking at partners and through the arranged marriage setup. And she's just come out of a very toxic relationship, which is how she found me. And she actually found me through the book.
Oh, nice.
So her mentor gave her the book, and she found me through that. And she so when we've been working and all of that, and just yesterday she was saying in the session, and she said, I'm meeting this guy, and I'm meeting like 3-4 people, and the one that is always on my mind is the one who's keeping me hanging all the time.
Oh God.
And then she said, I have now realized I am the toxic one.
Oh,
This is what I want. I want this like push and pull and all of that. And this time I'm, your voice echoes in my head where you tell me that stability is not boredom, like peace is not boredom. Stay with it. So this time I'm like just trying to stay with it. So people have that capacity, honestly. I don't think people don't have the capacity to understand or recognize where they are being the toxic one. It just needs the right environment, the right questions actually to get them there. Because nobody wants a bad relationship. Everybody wants to eventually find love.
True.
So if you figure out in the right way, and like I keep going back to shame, like that's my favorite concept. Because if you don't shame somebody, they are more willing to analyze, to objectively assess, okay, what am I doing over here? Can I do something different? So yeah, I think people absolutely have that capacity.
Now, talking about your client who somehow got attracted to the person who left her hanging, in general, there is a little zyada attraction towards the grey characters.
Yes.
Why is that? Why?
Mm.
We all like, on a rational mind, you ask, why, dude? Like, why?
Yeah.
But why?
2 reasons. One is a more general reason. We have been conditioned to look at passion and love in a very, very different, in a very unhealthy way, actually. Pop culture, a lot of romance literature and like movies and everything, right? Anxiety equals excitement over there. Emotional roller coaster equals passion over there.
Oh my.
If you're not crying in your pillow, is it even love?
Yeah.
But then...
Oh, that's the kind of quotes that actually pop up.
Right.
Yeah.
So then...
If there's no pain, is it even love?
Yeah, is it even love? But it's... Or love is supposed to hurt, right? No, but it's not supposed to hurt. It's supposed to hold you when you are hurting.
Oh wow, I just love that, what you said. Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
So one reason is this, because this conditioning is so deep that you cannot just pull it out of a person. That's what we've grown up on, right? And we have so much of narrative also handed down, like from generation to generation. Oh, this is what you should be doing. This is how you should be like keeping your man interested. This is how you should be keeping your woman interested. Oh, wives are like this. Oh, husbands are like this. It's everywhere. You can't do away from it. So that's one reason. The other reason is a little deeper psychological reason. The human brain likes black and white, right? It wants to feel safe in saying, okay, this is good and this is bad.
Yeah.
When you come across a grey character,
Yeah.
you get trapped into solving it. That is what the pull is. Oh, I have to figure this person out. Right? So now in that figuring that person out, you start mistaking that almost obsessive thought process of continuously trying to figure out what did they mean when they sent this text, what were they saying, oh, he said this yesterday, but today he did this, did I do something? So that the trap is what interests you, what makes you think that, okay, if only I can figure this out, then my life is sorted. So that is why grey characters attract us more. That is why if you think about stories, you are an avid reader, books are your life.
That's why I'm like continuously and answering a very serious question. I'm smiling here because I'm like, well, yes.
Right. And if you think about it, stories from forever have given us black and white characters. There has to be a hero, there has to be a villain. And the ones that don't have it, the ones that have ambiguous endings are the ones that stay with us the longest. Because the human brain will always find the ending to the story, the clear, wrapped up in a nice, neat little bow.
Wow. Okay, interesting. I need to think about this as a person as well as a reader. Okay, keeping all of this aside, coming into a little more serious topic where we are talking about domestic violence, abuses, everything. Somehow, today if there is a physical abuse, we are kind of ready to accept this. Like if a girl goes back and tell her mom and dad, my husband is beating me, they'll be like, tomorrow come back home. Well, majority of the scenarios, there are still parents who will still say you will
I was
still
just
need
going
to
to say that.
adjust. But when you're going back and trying to tell them, no, mentally there is an issue every single day. Everybody around you is so confused. Like you're imagining you technically become the bad person also. Why is mental abuse not even validated?
That's actually a very difficult question to answer because I don't think there is one clean answer to this.
Yeah, I know it's a
it's a
conversation.
Yeah,
it's a
like there are so many factors that go into that. One factor is that, again, going back to what I was just saying about the grey thing, right? When people are confronted with ambiguous evidence, they don't know what to do with it. Right? Okay. So if you're coming and crying and telling me that, oh, you know what, I feel unheard or unseen in my relationship, or I think, he hasn't laid a hand on me, but he neglects me, and I think that's emotionally abusive. I don't know what to do with that information, but that information is making me uncomfortable. Right? As a person, as a friend who's listening to you and all of that. Now I also have this inherent need of solving it for you immediately. Because my discomfort is causing me problems, right? So then I will rush to tell you, oh, nahi, this is just in your imagination. You know what? Nothing is happening. It's okay. Maybe talk to him or do something, all of that. So that's one. The other thing is, most of the time, actually, people in emotionally abusive relationships don't catch on themselves. It takes them a long time actually to understand what is happening, because they will doubt themselves so much. And honestly, most emotionally abusive relationships will first break your spirit. True. And if your spirit is broken, then you cannot trust yourself. So when they take that conversation to a loved one or a confidant, they themselves are all over the place. Right? So then people again get like, oh, you're not giving me a clean problem statement. Then it must not be true. Then it must be in your head. So then it becomes, again, the same invalidating experience. And then, of course, it becomes a vicious cycle because you're already doubting yourself. True. And then when you hear something like, oh, you are overreacting, or maybe, this is not like this or that, or he's never laid a hand on you, oh, you know what, he doesn't, it's not like he drinks or like he cheats on you. And then you start thinking that, oh, yeah, that's right. And I see people around me, having successful relationships, then maybe I am the one who's more nitpicking about this. And then just continues.
Okay. This chapter in your book also, when I read it, I was like, it's such a deep topic. There's so many conversations that actually need. But I'm also glad at the same time today people are a little bit more open to these conversations.
For sure.
Because earlier there used to also, I think, be a phase when you can't even talk about these to your friend, because everybody used to be in that the conditioning that you need to adjust and you need. I mean, that's how the society has kind of conditioned, especially all the women. But I'm so glad that today at least people are speaking about everything.
Definitely.
So coming back to your personal life now, as a daughter, as a person in a relationship, now as a therapist, throughout the years, and you've lived through all of this, right? How has your definition for love in general evolved or changed?
Tremendously, honestly. everything that I was just saying through this episode about, you know, how we misinterpret love, how we think of love to be something else. For example, for me, it was always about winning approval, right? Because I had a hypercritical mother. So then that's who I married, you know, because I that energy was so familiar to me. And now I know that it was exactly this thought in my head, that if only I can get this person to love me, I'll have everything. Because that's something I could not get from my mother. I still haven't, right? And then obviously I ended up self-sabotaging the whole damn thing. You know, that happened. And then today, in the phase of life, the relationship that I have, I have been able to now understand what I was just saying to you, right? Like that it's not supposed to hurt. It's supposed to create a space for you to stay when it's hurting without needing to run away from it.
Feel safe when it actually
Very
hurts.
safe, very safe. And honestly, safe is the only word that I would use to describe it. But another topic of conversation also is that, do we really understand safe? You know, safe is not just safe from physical safety, or like just like having a very non-judgmental space and all of that. It's in your nervous system. You know, it's when you can remind yourself that, okay, I am around this person and I don't have to hold my breath.
Wow, true.
That realization and that moment is life changing.
So true.
You know, when you can just like be like, okay, I can let go of my breath, I can breathe easy, and there is nothing weighing on me right now. Even in the difficult moments, like even in my current relationship, it's not that it's everything is rosy. We have our challenges, we have our difficult moments, we have differences of opinion and all of that. But even in our worst moments, that assurance that we are each other's person, and there's something that we say actually in our relationship currently, that we do not give an inch. You know, if there is something that has come up, it will be solved. We will not move only until it is solved. It doesn't matter if it takes 50 conversations, 100 conversations. And while those conversations are happening, nothing in the rhythm of the relationship will change. You know, our anchors of the relationship, like that good morning text, or you know, the whatever we are doing on a daily basis, that doesn't change. That kind of stability and that kind of security that you build, right? That is the anchor of love.
Wow. Easier said than done, but yeah, absolutely, very, very, very important. I mean, because I think it's not just about the bit where you're talking about safety. Like even in your one of your chapters where you're talking about the energies, the feminine and masculine energy, not the gender.
Yes.
Like, me being a female doesn't have anything to do with my female or my masculine energy. But I think understanding that you as a person, you have both, and when and how you are able to use your energy freely. It's a very important chapter, by the way, and I love that chapter. That's when actually my favorite one. This, my mind was going to that table in your book, and I was like, oh yeah, this and that and everything.
I actually have a retreat built around, like, and I think I mentioned it in this chapter also, exactly this feminine energy, because we really need to understand how these energies work and channel them.
Because if you're with somebody also, like your friends, if it's a male also for that matter, it's very important for them to be able to release or unleash their female energies, feminine energies. Because otherwise, I mean, come on.
Yeah, the feminine energy in a male is what guides intuition, what guides wisdom.
It's one of the most attractive things, to be very honest.
Absolutely.
I mean, that is great. So, okay, coming back to the last question. Otherwise, we'll not finish talking. People will literally walk away.
I know.
So, okay, coming back to one very crucial thing about your book itself. I want to literally focus it on the book. The title of the book. You're talking about when you give everything all at once, right? Gives us the understanding of what you're trying to talk about.
Right.
But is there something that no matter what, like let it be a female, let it be a male, like literally something, no matter what, you shouldn't give that
up? This might sound like a very underwhelming answer to this question, because it sounds like a very important question. But honestly, something you should not give up for anything is your own sense of groundedness and your own anchors.
I love that. Okay.
If that is getting compromised,
Yeah.
one, you will go into a free fall where you
Yeah.
would not make rational decisions.
Yeah.
And second, you will sooner or later end up losing yourself.
Okay.
I have another client. I was reminded of her right now. She recently got married, and she's in her 40s, and like, you know, it's a big moment for her. And she was just telling me recently that after getting married, like, there was a phase with everybody, it happens, right? Like, there's so much happening in like so much change happening in your life that you feel so disoriented. And she is a very anxious person, so she was telling me that, you know, I was feeling very all over the place, and I could see changes in my mood and irritability and all of that. And one day I realized, I said, okay, I need to do something to bring my rootedness back. So something that she used to love doing before getting married was her Pilates classes. And she said, I will just go back to. She said, I one day woke up and I decided if I can't do anything else right now because there is so much going on, and all of that, she was loving it, but it was still making her feel just very untethered, right? So she went back to her Pilates class. She had to travel 1 hour every day one way to get to that class. But she did that, and she said just going to that one class for 45 minutes brought my sense of rootedness back.
So nice.
I was able to then show up in my relationship as the person that I would like to be, in my best self. I was able to show up for myself in my best self. And I thought that was such a powerful realization for somebody. And therefore, I know, and I know this from personal experience also, the day you give up your anchors, the day you start compromising on your anchors, because you want to keep the peace, or you want to, you know, let something go by, you're betraying yourself. And the moment that starts, then there is no stopping it.
On that note, we need to. But thank you so much. I mean, every answer that you're giving me, there are 10 other questions popping up. I will literally have to create 10 other episodes with you, so I'm not going to do that today. But thank you so much for this very unfiltered conversation. I mean, it added a lot of value. You were not just talking about what you feel and what is there. There were a lot of actual facts in what you were telling, and everything came with the credibility of your experience as well. So thank you so much for sharing that. I hope the episode has become some way or the other useful to somebody sitting somewhere and watching.
Yeah.
And I think that would actually make a lot more sense. And any last message that you want to give to people?
There's something I say in my message as a professional, that I have learned through everything to never give up on love. And you don't have to either. Because and to not give up on love does not mean keep eroding yourself to find whatever version of love that you think you are chasing. Discover what healthy love means. Discover how it is supposed to nourish you, not just in a one-sided, on my own terms relationship, but it's a mutually nourishing emotion, and allow it to make you stronger and not weaker. Because if love has come into your life in whichever form, even if it is one-sided, you know, don't allow yourself to be left weaker after that. It is supposed to add something. It's a beautiful emotion. So remind yourself that let me take what I can take from this to enrich my life, rather than leave me hollower or lesser. So yeah, just don't give up on it. It is there for you to reach, find it, embrace it, but it just needs a little willingness to work. That's all.
Thank you so much for that message. And to the audience, thank you so much for being a part. And if you feel this episode is something that will help somebody somewhere in and around you, please do share the link with them, and they'll thank you later maybe. And like how Prachi said today, see you back when we are here with the next episode. Until then, stay grounded. The next show by Nagma